Hi everyone, my name is Jo Pettit. I am one of the lecturers in comparative literature at the University of Kent, and I just wanted to take a little bit of time to talk to you about comparative literature at Kent, what the discipline is, how it works, how we approach it, and hopefully you'll then have the opportunity to ask any questions that you have at the end. So first of all, I just wanted to say welcome. I appreciate that doing this online is slightly non-traditional, but hopefully I'll be able to give you all the information that you need. So the first thing to say, I suppose, is that comparative literature is a newer discipline than English, and it approaches the study of literature in a slightly different way. So rather than focusing on Anglophone literature written in English, be that English literature, American literature, some post-colonial literature, we tend to have a much broader look at literature and the way that it speaks to each other. So we don't just look at Anglophone literature, we also look at European literature, and then we go further afield. We look at African literature, Asian literature, Latin American literature. So we're really trying to think about how literature sits within its particular cultural and political context, to give you a bit of a glimpse into different cultures, into different societies, and to think about how these texts travel around and what we can learn from those conversations that are happening and are ongoing. Now, we do focus on literature that wasn't necessarily written in English. That's not to say that we expect you to speak any foreign language. We absolutely don't. We study everything in translation. You are, of course, very welcome to study languages alongside comparative literature and to read the texts in their original language if you have the language skills to do so. But that is by no means an obligation. So please don't feel put off in any way by the cross-linguistic and cross-cultural aspects of the course. And like I said, what we're really trying to focus on here is literature across national borders, geographic borders. We're also looking at different historical periods, different political periods. We're crossing different languages, as I've said, different cultures. And we also look at a range of different media. So we study primarily literature, some novels, some short stories, but we also look at films, we look at plays, we look at graphic novels. So there are a range of texts and types of texts that you can study as part of your comparative literature degree. And that gives you a really nice flavour, I think, of the different kinds of literature and how the form of a text might contribute somehow to its meaning. You know, why did an author choose a particular way of writing or a particular mode of writing? And what does that add to our understanding of the text? So that's kind of who we are and what we do. We tend to do things by theme, I would say. And that's not to say that we don't do the more traditional thing where we look at Romanticism, modernism, the classics. We do all of those things. And we do have a module on classical literature. We've had modules on modernism and Romanticism in the past. But what we tend to do is have modules that are organised more by theme. So, for example, we have one module on vampire literature, and within that we will study Romanticism and we will study the Gothic. We also have modules on women's writing, and within that we might look at Virginia Woolf and think about modernism, for example. So we do all the traditional approaches to literature, we just tweak them into and organise them in a way that is perhaps slightly non-traditional. We look at lots of different themes. We look at love, death, madness and dreaming. We have a few modules on kind of gender. We have modules on politics, philosophy. So there's a real range. And we really try and mix it up so that you get some of the classics. So you'll see Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey, for example. We look at Antigone in world literature. So all of these characters you might have come across before. We have a module on Casanova. But then we also have try and include some more contemporary literature, some literature that you might be less familiar with, that are less well known, less appreciated perhaps. So that you can really get a sense of how literature has changed and adapted, and how perhaps the classics or the texts that you know best might have influenced new waves of literature. Okay, so this is basically a summary of everything I've just said. I think there's a reference here on the second half of the slide also to world literature, which differs from comparative literature slightly, in the sense that comparative literature has traditionally been very Eurocentric. And so whilst we're moving away from English literature per se, it still limits itself geographically, linguistically to European culture, or at least to Western culture. World literature is trying to move beyond that, to try and incorporate different canons, different traditions, to think again about how texts circulate, what it means in this age of globalization to have an Asian text or an African text, how they might have been influenced by Western texts, and actually vice versa, which I think is also an interesting question. So these are things that you'll have the opportunity to study over the course of your degree at Kent. There will, of course, be a range of compulsory modules, and actually we don't have very many because we like to try and give you as much freedom as possible. So in your first year, your core module is the tale, and that is a fantastic module. It is incredibly popular. It's run for a very long time. It starts with the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the first piece of fiction that we have from circa 2000 BCE. And we go all the way through to Angela Carter's reimagining of the fairy tales from 1979. And within that, we're looking at short fiction, so lots of short stories, lots of extracts, but we cover the classics. So we have Homer's Odyssey, we have Ovid's Metamorphoses, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh. We go through the Arabian Nights, which is where the original Aladdin story comes from. Sinbad the Sailor comes from there too. And then we move into Chaucer, Boccaccio, Shakespeare. So these really classical kind of authors who you will expect to experience on a literature programme, I suppose, they make their appearance there too. Then after Christmas, we move into looking at fairy tales, specifically looking at how fairy tales change and adapt as they move through different societies, through different cultures. And then we move into what I would consider the more contemporary short stories. So there you have Edgar Allan Poe, you also have Guy de Maupassant, and then some Latin American authors, Borges and Cortázar, who are both incredibly exciting authors who you may or may not have come across before. But again, they prove very, very popular. Now, your Stage 2 core module is called The Text, Approaches to Comparative Literature. This is a slightly more theoretical module, so it gives you an introduction to lots of different theories, lots of ways of approaching the texts. So you will be introduced there to psychoanalysis, for example, and Freud, to feminism, to deconstruction, to these really important literary movements that help us to unlock texts or to read texts and interpret them in ways that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise. So that's really foundational in terms of our understanding of literature and how we might approach that. And then in your final year or your third year, you will be looking at doing a final year dissertation. Now this is an independent research project. It's 8,000 words and it's on a topic of your choosing, and you will have a supervisor who will help you through that process of coming up with a topic. And it should just be something that you want to do, something that you're interested in, that you've done over the course of your degree that you would like to look at more deeply, a module that you particularly enjoyed, or something that you really wanted to do but didn't have the opportunity to do during the course of your degree. And the dissertation gives you the opportunity to explore those topics in more detail. And add a little bit more depth to your understanding. I would say it's the pinnacle of your degree, I think. So there are your compulsory modules. They are for single honours students. The remit is slightly different if you're joint honours, and I would encourage you just to ask specifically about that if that's the path you're looking to follow. In terms of optional modules, we have a really nice range. So like I said, you have to take the core modules and they each run for 30 credits. That means that they run for a full year each. Now, these are a range of modules that you can take on top of that. Some of them are worth 15 credits, which means they only run in the autumn term or the spring term. And some of them are worth 30, so they run for the full year. And of course, you can make this up as you go along, depending on what you're interested in again. And hopefully there's a nice enough range here that you can find something that you really like. So, for example, if you love the classics, then there is a module in classical literature. If you love romanticism, there is a romanticism module. If you're really interested in post-colonial texts, there is post-colonial text, a post-colonial module. And we also offer things that are perhaps slightly more playful, that look at different kinds of media and approach things in a slightly different way. So the book and the film looks at adaptation. You know what they say, right? That the book is always better than the film. Well, why do we say that? Is that valid? And from what perspective is that valid? Don Juan and Casanova, this is a kind of counterpoint to a women's writing module that we run. And this is really about male promiscuity, sex, passion, anti-authoritarianism. There's lots of really cool and interesting things that happen with these two central figures. So the module is really about exploring them, about how they change over time as well. The Shoah, so the Holocaust in literature, film and culture, and playfulness, games and literature, which, as you can imagine, is great fun. We also have modules in travel literature, crime fiction. We have a vampire literature module, I think I've mentioned already. So these modules are really wide-ranging and should give you plenty of scope. And often when I meet my tutees, the problem becomes, what do I want to lose? What can I not study? Because there are too many options, right, to fit into your year. On top of that, you can also take wild modules, which means you can take modules from other departments if you would like to. There is a limit on how many credits you can use for that. But certainly if you wanted to take a module in French, in psychology, in sociology, then there are options to do that as well. So, you know, again, the world is your oyster when it comes to what you actually study here. Here is a slightly fuller list. I will leave you to peruse those in your own time. I think I've mentioned most of them already. Prize winners is a really interesting one. It's a very contemporary module looking at what it means for an institution to give a literary award. To what extent should we value that and credit it? On what criteria are they basing this on? And then looking at some of those texts that you wouldn't necessarily see in other literature courses simply because they are so contemporary. So that makes for a nice addition, I think. The refugee narratives and politics of displacement, the one at the bottom there, is of course about representations of refugees, and given the current climate, and given the current situation with the refugee crisis, that seems like a very timely module. And that's really introduced, or the themes there are really introduced in Freedom and Oppression and Guilt and Redemption, both of which are quite political. They tend towards being slightly philosophical. Lots of interesting stuff in those modules as well. Okay, how we teach. Depending on what year you're in, this changes slightly, but there are two basic structures to your classes. You'll either be given a lecture, which is just a lecturer standing at the front giving you information. And that could be historical information, political information, theoretical information, information that you really need to understand and unlock these texts. That will always be supplemented by a seminar, which is more discussion-based. They tend to have no more than 20 students in. At absolute maximum, it would be 25. And the idea is that you will have a seminar leader who will introduce questions and topics, and it will be a discussion between students. And that's actually one of the more fun aspects, I think, because there's so many rich ideas comes out of those discussions. So hopefully you will enjoy those. It says at the bottom here, we always give one-to-one feedback on essays, and you will all be assigned an academic advisor. One thing I would like to really emphasise is that the Department of Comparative Literature at the University of Kent is quite small. We don't have huge cohorts. We don't have a huge number of staff. You will get to know the staff that are in the department very, very well, and they will get to know you reasonably well. That means that you can really, you will always have people you can go to, hopefully people that you feel comfortable going to. to get advice on your essays, to get advice on essay plans. If something's not going right, to think about how you might change things. So there's lots of options there. And this sense of community is really intrinsic to the Department of Comparative Literature. It's how we really define ourselves. And it's something that we all really take pride in. And it would be, being part of that community is a different experience to going to a bigger institution where you are one in hundreds sitting in a lecture theatre. So that's something to think about when you're considering where to go, I think. Okay, developing your skills. Literature is an interesting mode of study. There are so many transferable skills here that are appealing to employers. So interpretive skills, you can analyse text, you learn to question, you learn to engage with issues. And it says here issues of translation and theory, but that again is translatable, right? Because you are learning how to take a concept and apply it in a way that is meaningful and in a way that is also critically thought out. And that is a really important skill for employers. Of course, your writing skills, your presentation skills, especially your oral presentation skills, your communication skills, your organisational skills, all of these things will benefit from a degree in comparative literature. And intercultural competence, I think, is very specific to CompLit in the sense that you are learning about other cultures and other languages all the time. So all of those cultural sensitivities that, again, are really important in today's day and age, in this age of globalization, these are things that you are getting additional training in. And again, that's really beneficial to employers, I think. We do some things that aren't just literary based. So we do a SWIPE conference, which is a conference of students' work in progress, usually based on the dissertation in the third year. Gives you the chance both to present your work and to get feedback on your work, but also to do the organisational side of the conference, which again are more transferable skills. It's event management, event organisation, and again you'll have the support of a member of staff, but it's a really interesting one if you want stuff to beef up your CV. Now this is a really good one too. This is about the year abroad. If you study comparative literature at Kent, you will be offered the opportunity to do a year abroad. And of course, there are huge benefits here. And this is one of the very few times in your life where you will just be able to disappear off to a different country to enjoy and soak up their culture. And there are different ways you can go about this, but of course, there are lots of things here to put on your CV. I did a year abroad myself, and it wasn't really about stuff to put on your CV for me. For me, it was about learning to live on my own in a country where my language skills were not fantastic. So developing those language skills, but also having the self-confidence to go and explore new cultures, new countries, and have new experiences. These are all really valuable. And I remember my year abroad as one of the most important times of my life. So this is just a list of places you might be able to go. This is an evolving list, so there are other options potentially that might become available, or if there's somewhere specific you want to go, there might be some scope for manoeuvrability there. But this is the core list as it stands at the moment. And you can see there's plenty of options there, plenty of options. Okay, you can do a joint honours degree if you so choose. That means that you would do comparative literature for half the time, and then for the other half of the time you might do another language, you might do film, you might do cultural studies or classical and archaeological studies. Again, lots of scope to explore different interests. One thing I should say here, if you do the joint honours degree, you get 50% credits for each of the two halves of your degree. And that means that the requirements in terms of core modules, etc., might change slightly. And again, I would encourage you to ask about that specifically if that's the route you choose to follow. But doing a joint honours degree also means that you will have two things on your degree certificate at the end. So instead of degree in comparative literature, you might have degree in comparative literature and drama, for example. So it allows you to look at another very broad discipline. Our academic staff all publish, we're all research active, but again, I've said to you before, we're a very small department. We really care about our students. We really care about our research. So what we're teaching you is often at the forefront of what we're writing about and researching ourselves. We're really passionate, I think, about the subjects that we teach. And hopefully that translates into a positive teaching, or I think it does translate into a positive teaching experience. And here is the evidence for that. The Complit excelled in the National Student Survey, with over 90% of our students having expressed satisfaction with teaching. 100% of students reported overall satisfaction with the quality of their course. 100% of students. And we also have a very high turnaround rate for the NSS. So what this tells us is that the students who are coming to Kent are having an excellent experience, both because of the way that we teach, I think, but also because of the variety of the course offered. This sets us apart from the rest of the Russell Group universities who also offer comparative literature. Again, they're bigger departments, but they lose that community spirit that can provide this kind of experience. So that, again, might be something that you want to consider when you're weighing up your options. And here is just a list of things of careers that you might go into. This is important in the current climate, I think. We have a lot of people who go into teaching, but also journalism, the civil service, really anything that requires you to be able to write and to communicate. These things are all career options available to you. Creative writing, we have a lot of people go on to further study. Anything to do with communications, PR, marketing, those kind of careers, which again require interpersonal skills. They require presentation skills. These are all viable options, I think. And again, it says at the bottom here that 100% of Kent graduates from 2017 who completed the national survey, and again, we always get a very high turnaround of completion, were in work or further study within 6 months of completing their degree. So this is a really viable degree in terms of your career and employment opportunities. Okay, I think I've been speaking for long enough. Hopefully you will have plenty of opportunity to ask some questions, but please do feel free to get in touch with us if we can be of any further help. All right, thank you very much.